Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello everybody, Bob Lusk. Let's go live for a little while and see if we can't talk about something near and dear to your heart, or maybe even mine. Let's talk about fish. Solicited a few ideas a while ago, and let's see here. I've got a couple of ideas. So Bay wanted to talk about some stuff. I got that. Hey, Virgil Meyer, here you are. Virgil, you sent me an email, and I have not had time to sit down and go through it. So let's just talk. Let's knock that out right now, and because I think this is a pretty interesting topic. So Virgil Meyer lives in South Central Iowa. I think that's how you say it. And he's got about a 6 or 8 acre lake. So Virgil, you can chime in here anytime you're ready. So Virgil sent a list of questions here, and I'm going to tackle these. So first we go back to his stocking records. So I got to work with Virgil and coach him on how to build his lake. It's called Long Creek. And so back in 2022, the lake filled up, so he's in his 3rd year now, and he stocked fathead minnows, and it was the numbers I gave him were contrary to what all the local fisheries people tell him up there. I told him it's like a 9 acre lake. I think, help me out, Virgil, I think that's right. Hello, Jeremy Day, Jim Allen, good to see you. Jim Allen, I'm about 2/3 of the way through editing your article on aging fish. So guys, in the November-December issue of Pond Boss, there will be a really good article with Hey Kim and Jim Allen. Jim Allen is the lead author on that, about aging fish. It's going to be pretty darn good. Jeremy Day wants to talk about plankton blooms in the fall. John Dyer is working on, John Dyer is doing a stellar job in trying to help us figure out how to consolidate some of this information out of these shows and put it into some shorts. 9 acres, there we go. So we stocked 9,000 bluegill, 90 pounds of fathead minnows, and 2,200 red ear sunfish. That was in June of 2022. Then in March of 2023, he stocked 400 walleyes that were 4 to 6 inches, 1,800 yellow perch. And then in November, 8 months later, he stocked 150 3 to 5 inch smallmouth bass. Not stocked any largemouth bass. This is where it gets pretty interesting. Hello, R.E. Thompson. Good to see you, buddy from Mississippi. A motorcycle friend. If I ever rode a motorcycle, I would want to ride with you. But I don't. I broke my arm when I was a kid. Made me quit. I was a baby. Like 15. So anyway, that's what he stocked. And so now, the questions that he's got. I'm scrolling here. I got my phone. Got his questions here. Stocking this fall. I talked to a fish hatchery about their fall fish supply. He is largemouth bass and walleye savvy. Okay, so talking about stocking yellow perch, more walleye, and smallmouth bass, his choices this fall when the temperature gets as close to 50. And so the fish hatchery guy is recommending fathead minnows. I don't think I'd do that. I think the food chain needs to stand on its own merit. Now, the one thing that could make me change my mind is further down here where you talk about walleye. So he says the fishing survey this year, which I think is through angling, correct me if I'm wrong. And Virgil, I don't want to talk about you in the third person because you're standing right here. Hello, Ron Krisman. Good to see you, buddy. So Virgil says we didn't know about the largemouth bass presence before the first stocking. Well, there's a pond right upstream from Virgil's lake. And we had the conversation about the odds of fish getting into his lake were probably pretty high. So we had that conversation, so we knew there was a risk there. So let's see here. He says largemouth bass had not been stocked, which that's right, but they swam down from a pond. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right, because that pond's right there. I noticed 3 largemouth bass in spring of 2023 in my pond that looked to be 10 to 12 inches in length. Last year was 5 to 7 bass caught, largemouth bass 12 to 16 inches. Relative weight 122%. But what that tells us is those numbers are low. The bass numbers are low. The water warmed up, shut down all the bites. So yesterday he and his lovely bride caught a 17 inch 3.16, 115% relative weight. Caught 5 walleye, 12 to 17. It looked like they were trying to find something to eat. Seemed empty-gutted. It's probably true. So the thing about stocking fatheads into an existing predator-prey pond is that it's really, the juice isn't really worth the squeeze because they're not going to get a chance to reproduce. So basically what you're doing is you're giving those fish a snack. You know, and the hard part about trying to go grow walleyes in a lake like that is they're having pretty much to depend on bluegills and red ear sunfish. So here it's been recommended that he stock a few pounds of golden shiners. I think that's probably a pretty good idea. Hello, Charles Hury. Good to see you. John Henry. There's Bay. Bay, I'm going to get to your topic here any minute. So Virgil said, you know, so far I've been hand feeding the fish. I do understand that using a fish feeder makes better sense. I'd like to get one feeder started ASAP. I'll see if I can help you with that tomorrow. So yes, I do think feeding fish is a good idea. Now, here's the issue in the Midwest where you are, Virgil, is you've got to make sure you're paying attention to water quality. So further down here, I'll tell you what, Virgil, we're going to need to have a talk because you're asking about habitat aeration. I do think now is the time to start looking at aeration for installation in the spring because we figured, you know, 3 years in, by that time you're going to have some buildup of nutrients, especially if you're consistently feeding the fish. The thing that you got to be careful about feeding fish in the Midwest and northern tier states is you don't want your water quality to deteriorate. Now, the good thing about where Virgil is in Iowa is that how you say it? Iowa? You know what I'm doing. Is you got to pay close attention because you guys have this thing that we don't have here in Texas. We have this thing called summer. You have this thing called winter. So you got to think through that. So aeration could be pretty helpful. Deborah Corlew, good evening, Bob. Hot and dry northwest Illinois, less than a half an inch of rain. Woo, you guys need some rain. Hello, Mark Dyer from Nebraska. So we can talk about habitat, but you know what? You did all that up front. And I don't mind talking to you more about it, but you handle all that stuff right up front. Bathymetry map. I'm going to save that topic for another day, but I don't mind talking to you about it over the phone, so we'll do that. Now so there's kind of the nuts and bolts. So here's the gist. The predators in Virgil's Lake are in their second year. The third year is when it really starts to get to the point where you got to start making some decisions about what to cull, what you shouldn't cull. Now keep in mind, the walleye that you're catching are probably the hungry ones. I bet $1 to a donut, a blueberry donut, which I don't eat anymore, that you've got some really, really obese walleye in that lake, I bet you. And you're catching the ones that are hungry because they haven't really figured out exactly how to play the game for their age in that lake. So I'd be paying attention to how well your bluegill have reproduced. It's still a little early for an electrofishing survey. I'd probably do one next spring to see how you are going into the springtime. I don't know, you know what, let's have a phone conversation. We'll talk about yellow perch. We'll talk about smallmouth bass. I kind of lean toward a yes on those, especially if the fish guy will throw in some golden shiners. So I think those could be a yes. So if you don't hear from me by about, I don't know, noon tomorrow, call me. You got my phone number. So now, let me see here. Let's go back and look here. Okay, I said hello to Charles. Mike Cottrell from Palo Pinto County. Okay, I'm looking here. Plankton blooms in the fall. Jeremy Day did message me the other day, and he's got a plankton bloom in the fall. I love having a plankton bloom in the fall in Montgomery County, Texas. I think that's great simply because, and actually this holds true for pretty much everybody that's watching this, pretty much. If you have a good bloom in the fall, then that's going to enhance survival rates of your fall bluegill spawns. So if you have fall spawns with your bluegills, and you got a pretty good survival rate going into the winter, you've added to your food chain, and this is the time of year when your fish are going to gain the most weight. And they're going to, right now is when they need the most food as they can get. So let me back up here and make sure I didn't miss anything. Then I'm going to tackle what Bay Miltonberger sent. So Bay said, he said, talk about how structure helps grow big bass. And then sedentary versus marathon fish. And regular fish versus jumpers. So all those topics are very timely. So I'm going to set my little phone right over here where I can look at it by my water jug. So let's talk about how structure helps grow big bass. Here's how that works. When you have the right amount of habitat in a lake, that helps increase productivity of the water. Now this gets a little tedious to explain, but let me hit it. Think about fish hatcheries, for example. They don't want any structure, no habitat. They want fertile water, good spawns, and high survival rates of their young of the year fish. That's what they want. But keep in mind, they're growing one species of fish, typically. They might be growing bass or bluegills or yellow perch or whatever they're growing in that pond. Like Ron Krisman up in Michigan, his mission is to grow as many smallmouth bass as he can, but he's also got a couple of ponds where he's got mixed species. So that's more of a predator-prey relationship, and if you've got the right habitat for all those species of fish and you got the right food chain, they're going to do pretty good. So the habitat is going to be based on the species you've got and what your mission is. So when Bay's asking talk about growing really big bass with the right kind of structure, what that means to guys like me is we want the right kind of underwater communities where fish can reproduce, not go very far, to be able to hide and loaf and not get eaten too fast. But just beyond that, you've got the kind of structure that's really attractive to bass or, walleye or whatever your predator fish are. You've got the kind of structure that's attractive to them. And since Bay asked about largemouth bass, what that means is ambush points. So like Bay put some mossback fish habitat in his lake in 3 different places or 4 different places. And 2 of those places are lined up parallel to the shore where there's spawning beds, and then there's some brush and some stick-ups of terrestrial weeds and other little willow saplings and things where little bitty fish can congregate. And then when you move out into deeper water, that's where the big bass like to hang out and ambush their prey. Now the thing about Bay's Lake is he's also got threadfin shad, gizzard shad, and tilapia. So his bass don't really have to go very far to be able to chow down and have a good meal. And when the question he's asking about sedentary versus marathon fish, we did a study, gosh, holy cow, it's been 20 years ago now, where I had the pleasure to work with a PhD student out of South Dakota State University on a project that I had developed for like 5 or 6 years. Actually, about 5 or 6 years up to that point. And he radio tagged 40 largemouth bass from 2 pounds up to 7 pounds. And this was a 125-acre lake in East Texas. Then he used telemetry to monitor the movement patterns of all these fish. Now, he didn't track every fish every day. He would zero in on a handful of fish and watch their movements on any given point in time. But what he found out was like that 7-pound bass relative weight never did get above about 95. But that 7-pound female bass would move almost 2 miles every day. That fish was a marathon runner. So part of the study was determining whether or not to add some habitat to congregate bass and make them or give them the opportunity to be more sedentary so they didn't expend so much energy moving and they could get bigger. That was the premise. So they worked with Andy Benson with Mossback, and I got to work on that as well. And they built, that's where Andy really came up with the concept of fish cities. Now, he'd already been working on that idea, but he got to put it in practice. And what we learned from after putting some fish cities in there during this study, that there were some of those tagged bass that would come to the fish cities and they'd hang out there a long, long time. But those fish that were marathon runners, that was their genetics and their conditioning in that lake, and they didn't change. So that 7-pound bass never really got much bigger than 7 pounds. I don't know how many times it was recovered, but I know he tracked it for 18 months, and he might have recovered it once or twice. I don't remember that particular study. But, you know, one of the goals to grow big bass is to make them expend the least amount of energy possible to eat. So that means providing them ambush cover, ambush structure, where they can hang out, hide out, and then not have to go very far to get a full meal deal like a number one at McDonald's for those kind of fish. So the marathon runners, they're burning energy all the time because they're moving. Just to kind of give you another point about this, out of those 40 fish, there was one fish that never left an area any bigger than a football field in a 125-acre lake. But that marathon runner bass, that one in particular, would move 2 miles a day, and it was random. You know, when I first started hearing about it through the PhD student back then, he was telling me that there was no, what I thought was that fish had a trap line. You know, it would go from here to there, to there, to there, to there, to there. Didn't do that. It might run from one end of the lake to the other, sit there for 30 minutes, and then go right back to where it was, and then go across the lake, and then back down the lake. It was random. It was not. There was no methodology behind the way that fish was moving at all. Where other fish seemed to have some method. They would go from this ambush point to that ambush point to that ambush point. You know, and so that was a very, very interesting study. So here's what that means to us. If we can provide the right kind of ambush cover, some of the fish are going to take advantage of that. Especially if we can provide the food chain with happy water to entice that fish to not have to leave that structure, because fish don't have the ability to learn. They react based on instinct and conditioning. And providing big structure to grow big bass assists in that conditioning. If they can orient to that structure and not have to leave it, and their food's not that far away, then they're going to use it. So therein lies part of the strategy as to how we try to decide where to put artificial structure. Like in Bay's Lake, for example, this is something that Virgil's going to appreciate. The very first thing we did, Bay called me in November, said, "Hey, I'm buying this ranch. It's got a great lake on it. I'd like to figure out what to do with it." So I went out with him and looked at it, and it was a windy day. He says, "You want to get on the lake?" "No, I don't." It was in November. It was cold, and I didn't want to fight whitecaps on a 100-acre private lake. But there were several things that struck me that day. One thing that struck me that I had no idea why it was going on, I do now, I didn't then, was that lake had a good bloom, Jeremy Day. You're asking about that. That lake, looking at it, the green colored water in November was not characteristic of what I'm used to seeing on lakes in November in Texas. Typically, the water's got more of a tannic look to it. It's the clarity's higher, but he had a 24-inch bloom. And I mean, that water looked great. And I knew it wasn't pigment. You know, it wasn't because of the minerals dissolved. There was a living plankton bloom going on in that lake when the water temperature was in the upper 50s, which that piqued my curiosity some. So then, the first thing I said, you know, most of the time I'll say, you know what, we need to go analyze the fishery. Let's see what kind of fish you got. As I looked at that lake, the first thing that struck me is we need a bathymetry map. We need to see how this lake is shaped as it is and what does the bottom of it look like. Because, you know, part of my thought process was, how in the world can a lake have a bloom like that? Why isn't it choked with aquatic plants? Because it wasn't. There's some dynamics here that we need to figure out, and I think we need to start with the bathymetry map. So that's what we did. We built a bathymetry map, and things started kind of jumping out at me. The deepest water at that point was like 13 feet deep. You know, and I think it's 13 feet deep at the deepest when the lake is at full pool. Maybe 15 feet. I think 13 and a half feet deep is the deepest. But then as I studied the contours, it was very clear what was going on. When it would rain and water would flow, there's still a distinct creek channel that meanders, comes down one side of the lake, cuts across the lake to the near shore, and then circles back around and goes out toward the dam where water overflows. So it started. So then we electrofished it in December. I don't electrofish lakes in Texas in December, but he'd closed on the ranch. We needed to see what he had. I was amazed at the things that we found, and I started, as I thought about it. I mean, when I'm working on a lake that's 100 acres and there's channel catfish in it, we'll find one or two maybe in December. You know, typically we'll find most of what's in the lake, but not many in December. Oh my gosh, that first time we went out, I think we shot 2 days back to back. We shot 66 channel catfish, over 75 bass, bunch of crappie, carp, and gizzard shad, and crappie, quite a few crappie. So then it started kind of registering with me, and I kept 40 of those channel catfish to give to a guy, to a butcher, because he donates them to people that are hungry. Well, I brought those fish home. I couldn't find the guy. And then when I finally found him, he said, "No, I don't want all of them," because he was going to butcher them and he didn't have time. So I said, "Well, heck, I'm going to clean these fish." Well, I cleaned them, and there's two things that struck me immediately. Number one was they had yellow fat along their backbones. And the second thing was their guts were full of black detritus looking stuff. And as I dug into it, I think I butchered all 40 fish, something like that. And there were pieces of willow leaves. 4 of them had a bluegill in it, which that made sense to me. But what didn't make sense to me was all the black stuff. And then I started thinking about it. I thought, oh my gosh, those fish have run out of food. They've overeaten the food chain with the bass, with the crappie, and the channel catfish as predators. And now they've gone up in the shallow areas where all the stick-ups are. Stick-ups meaning in that lake a bunch of terrestrial weeds where the lake had dropped several feet. Weeds grew up. The lake flooded the weeds. The leaves fell off, and the catfish were eating that stuff. Which channel catfish will do that. You know, they don't want to die. They want to eat. You know, they want to grow. Well, I noticed that their relative weights were lower than they should be. And then it hit me. The yellow fat came from eating a lot of vegetation. So then I started saying, okay, wait a minute. We got gizzard shad. We got carp. Those are bottom feeders. They're feeding on the same stuff these channel catfish are. And channel catfish are not scavengers, believe it or not. They're predator fish, but they're kind of like teenage boys. They're going to go to the refrigerator. They're going to look for meat. If there's no meat, they have to eat broccoli and cheese. They'll eat broccoli and cheese. That's channel catfish. And so as I started analyzing it some, I started thinking, wait a minute, you know, those fish were up in water 5 feet, 4 feet deep in December feeding. Not totally normal. Well, the yellow fat tells me that they've been feeding on vegetation quite a bit because they store that as yellow fat. You know, so that made me think, okay, they've been doing this for several months. Those fish are competing with all the other game fish and overeating the food chain. So that's when we started coming up with a game plan where we needed to harvest as many of those fish as we could get. We needed to take out carp, needed to take out channel catfish, and crappie, because Bay's goal is to grow some really big bass in as big numbers as we can. And as we studied the bathymetry map, here's where I'm circling back to the structure thing, is the lake didn't have nearly the amount of bass attractive cover as it should have. So that's when I got on the phone and called Andy and said, hey, Andy, come over here. Let's go take a look at this lake. And Andy brought his bass boat. He caught a bass that over 10 pounds and a 9-pound bass. I think that was in, Bay might correct me, but I think that was in January. He came over twice. And so that's when we started figuring out, how do we place this structure? What are the areas? And Bay had several things. You know, one thing is his daughter likes to ride a jet ski, so don't put anything where she could get hurt. Check. So we started looking, and as we thought about these different areas, we saw some areas where the fish like to congregate anyway. So we decided to enhance that, which is not far from fairly shallow water where fish can reproduce, and there's some other structure that goes along with it. So that's how we started kind of coming up with the ideas of adding structure. So what's going to be fun to watch is how that structure enhances the lake's ability to produce more fish. Now, when I say produce more fish, what I mean by that is how it can grow more fish. An angler, when I say produce more fish, you know structure is going to produce more fish for an angler because they're going to congregate the fish. But where I'm going with that is what can we do to a lake with structure to increase and improve its ability to grow more fish? So that's where I wanted to go with that topic that Bay sent me at about 7:20. All right, I'm going to scroll down here and see what we got. Deborah Corley, very happy with bass growth, stock 3 to 5 inches in April. Just caught 11.5 to 13.5 this month. That's really, really good. Great growth. One was 110% relative. Well, I love you guys talking about relative weights. Mark Dyer, proper structure and habitat helps reduce calorie expenditure needed to consume food, allowing more weight to be on. There you go. Mark Dyer, yes. That's the only other comment I got about that. I think the Sitting Dockside podcast talks about that fish habitat study with him. Interesting listen if it's the same study. Yep, it's the same one. Was that bass named Dory? No, but it should have been. Greg McMillan, 2 Casco surface aerators. Uh-oh. Good. Moving some water. Greg McMillan's got a lake over around Argyle, Texas, near Denton. And he is actually working with Aquafix Landon Wyatt, who's coming to the Institute of Hydropondology, by the way, and they're doing some really, really sophisticated pond water and sediment analysis. So when it's time, we'll talk about that. Yep. And Greg, that's going to be one of your secrets, because Greg is feeding heavy in a 2.5 or 3 acre pond. He really does need to move water. Yep. R.A. Thompson, how many times did he get it caught, or does he just run? I don't know how many times she was caught, but I know the first time she was caught was in an electrofishing boat, and it was tagged. This is interesting. I was there the day that fish was captured in an electrofishing boat. We brought it in. It was sedated. They put the radio tag in it, sutured it because they had to. So they sedate the fish and knock it out, and use a scalpel, cut the gut cavity open, insert the tag, which is about as big as 2/3 of your thumb, and then suture that cut shut, and then hit it with an antibiotic. Well, that fish we brought it probably half a mile from where it was to bring it in to put the tag in. So we turned it loose, and then we went back out electrofishing, went right back over that same area about an hour later, and we shocked it up. So it moved that whatever that was, half a mile, right back to where it was that same day. Jeremy Day, and so R.E., I don't know if that fish was ever caught on a hook and line. I don't know that they ever tracked that. The way they tracked the movement was with telemetry, because that radio tag pings, and they could track it and get GPS points as to where that fish was located and how deep of the water. Was it in the thermocline? Was it in 4 feet of water? Whatever. So they were able to track all that. I don't know if it was ever caught. All right, so Bay says that Andy Benson caught a 10.9 and a 10.2. Why would my grow-out pond have a bloom but the main lake not have one? Probably because of the volume of feed that's being put into that grow-out pond. Jeff Wallen, how long after a total fish loss from turnover can a person restock? That's a good question. February 27. Okay, Bay says it's February 27 when those 2 fish were caught. But I remember in, I think December was when Andy came the first time, and we got a little bit of a lesson on angling about that time. So Christopher Aguilar is checking in. Good to see him. How long after a total fish loss from a turnover can a person restock? You know what? I'm going to suggest put an Apple tag on some. You're thinking out of the box, dude. See, I'm in some consternation. How long after a total fish loss? Okay, first of all, okay, I'm gonna answer it like this. I don't think I've ever seen a total fish loss. I think I've seen massive fish losses. Actually, I got a call the other day from a guy that used to be one of my customers, and he had a company come out and treat his pond weed, and they did it in August. They treated the whole pond, 3 acres, murdered the fish. And some of those fish were stunningly beautiful, 6 and 7 pound bass. And it just annihilated it. Killed the bushy pondweed, but it also knocked out the fish. Well, the company that did it owned the mistake, and they came out and brought out an electrofishing boat and took a look, and it was not a total fish kill. So I would expect yours is not a total fish kill either. So Jeff, let me see if I can see where you're from. Yep, I don't know where you're from. Ooh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to end my broadcast. So Jeff, where are you? Part of the planet does your pond reside? So here's what I'm going to tell you while I'm waiting on you to answer that. Usually 2 to 3 weeks after a turnover, if you know the water turned over, what happens with a turnover? Let me explain that to everybody. It's 8 o'clock. Let's do the commercials. Pond Boss Magazine, hey, $35 a year. Cheaper than a Friday night date, and it lasts a year. And I guarantee there's nuggets in every issue. This was in the mailbox today. Fall fish growth. Set the table now. So there's an article in there about that, about how to make sure that you're feeding the fish. Here's one it all, fill the niches. So that story is about all the different niches that reside within your body of water, and are you utilizing those niches? If you're not, you should be. Here's what I mean by that. It's just, since we're talking about bait, okay, and it's harvest time, take nature's bounty. How do you know what the bounty is? You got to figure that one out. That's part of the fun of doing this stuff. So let's just take Bays Lake. Here's the niches. The primary productivity part of the lake is the area around the perimeter in water typically less than 8 feet deep. That's where the primary productivity happens. That's where the plants grow. That's where fish reproduce. That's where bluegill, red ear, sunfish, largemouth bass live. That's where channel catfish, crappie like to be there quite a bit. But then there's other niches. There's the benthic niche, which that's where the carp, gizzard shad love to be because they're bottom feeders. And they're going to be above the thermocline, like in Bays Lake. Bays Lake is 13 feet deep. His thermocline, I can't imagine the lake's turned over yet. So if we went and measured, try to find the thermocline, it's probably at 6 or 7 feet. So all water that are 6 and 7 feet deep or less, the bottom niche is where the carp are feeding and where the gizzard shad are feeding. Then you've got the littoral zone I just described, Littoral. That's where the primary productivity goes, where the plants are, and the plankton is prolific in that area. Then you've got open water niches, you've got deeper water niches, you've got the shallow niches. Gambusia, minnows live in the shallow areas. Hybrid stripers live in the open water. Crappie move out to open water in the summertime, move to shallow water in the spring and in the fall. They'll be in that deeper water, there. So if you can figure out all your different niches, and like at Bays Lake, there are, let me think, there are 2 significant coves with a long winding creek, a shallow flat actually there's 2 shallow flats where the water is less than 6 feet deep with stick-ups. One of those flats grows quite a few American lotus pads. The lotus pads create a totally different niche. When you've got lotus pads like he does, it probably covers 4 acres, maybe. It's pretty interesting because that lake holds hands with itself, with the stuff that grows in it, with the plants. He's got some coontail, which grows insects. Those lotus pads, there's substrate underneath it, where insects and phytoplankton and periphyte grow. So there's a lot of really cool niches in your ponds if you'll find them. And then if you can figure out what all thrives in those niches, then you can enhance that by making sure you have the fish, and then recognize how those niches work. It might be a strategy as to where you put your feeder, So that's the kind of stuff that I think you need to think about, is how those niches fit. I kind of diverted off of that. Birddogit.com. Check that out. That's my son Jonathan's gig. Jonathan he's been in a funk lately. He was one of Charlie Kirk's buddies. Jonathan Lusk and Charlie Kirk were friends. Jonathan served on his board of advisors when he was first really getting started, like in 2016, 17, and 18. They texted all the time. Jonathan is, I think, 44. Charlie was 31. So Jonathan got to help, in a small way, mentor Charlie Kirk. And he's devastated by that. And, I mean, aren't we all? Yeah, such a senseless murder. But Jonathan started birddogit.com about 4.5 years ago, and his first intent was to figure out how to take guys in his age class, listen to me talking biology stuff, age class, who are raising kids, busy working, living life, doing what they do, baseball, dance lessons, whatever they do. And he didn't want to have to hire an outfitter to go hunt. He didn't want to lease, didn't have time for that. Doesn't have very many friends that have extra deer they want to murder or shoot or take out or harvest or whatever. So he created, using an investment banker type financial model, to build a VRBO Airbnb site like that for hunting. And now he's expanding it, and he's trying to figure out where his niches are. So if you get a minute to go to birddogit.com, at least go give it a cursory look, just because I'm asking you to. And you might see some things that are interesting. Easy Docks of Texas, man, longtime friends with David Schneiderman. Go to, after this is over, also spend time at the Pond Boss YouTube page. We've got quite a few new videos up, as well as Leanne posts these Facebook Lives. She'll download this one tomorrow and put it on YouTube. But we've got some other pretty helpful YouTube videos, and John Dyer is helping to consolidate. Like, he probably will take this broadcast, pull the meat out of it, edit it, put it into a short form format like a reel or a short, and put it out there on YouTube where you guys can get the meat out of this and just dissect it, take out all the stuff that's not relevant to the topic, and he'll build something pretty cool. So Texas Hunter Products, check those guys out, texashunterproducts.com. They've got great fish feeders, but we're getting into hunting season. They've also got fish habitat stuff. So spend a little time on their website and just let them know that Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, sent you. Purina Mills, love their fish foods, love their MVP. I've told the story over and over how Game Fish Chow was born. I got to play a role in that. It was really kind of fun. That story is going to end up in a book. Speaking of books, my cartoonist buddy, who has won all kinds of Katie Awards through his efforts in the newspaper business, I think he's 77. He has created some great cartoons to help paint the picture of some of my life stories. And it's kind of funny for me to sit here and say, hey, you want to hear my life stories? And I think I've mentioned this before, and I'll have, where my oldest son, Ty, who will be 52 here in a few days, in October. Gosh, I think his birthday's tomorrow. It's either tomorrow or the 3rd. October 3rd. He'll be 52 years old. I have a 52-year-old son. He's older than me. And I'm not sure how that works, but that's the truth. I wouldn't lie to you about that. He asked me a couple of years ago, 2 years ago in 2023, hey, Dad, you got some cool stories. Write them down, will you? I did. And then Jonathan comes along and says, hey, Dad, video yourself telling those stories. I did. Chico, I love me some Chico, said, dude, some of these stories people are going to want to read. And I said, oh, man, what? So I bounced them off of the cartoonist, I bounced them off of an editor and a writer, and they said, yeah, you know what, some of these stories are pretty good. So all the stories have been written, edited, proofread. They're about to be uploaded to layout, and the cartoonist is just about finished. And the cover's coming along. I still don't have a title. I like the ideas you guys are pitching, but nothing has really struck me yet. So we got to get the title. When that happens, then that book is going to go on the market. So there's the commercials. I burned up 7 minutes on that. Thanks for obliging that. R.E. Thompson. R.E.'s in his 80s, and he's as active as anybody in their 50s. He says, I love getting your magazine. Uh-oh, I scrolled past it. Let me get back up here. I love getting your magazine. The first thing I do is sit down and read all the Ask the Boss. I saw the one article you answered for me, but I've been looking for your answer to my question on thermocline. Did I miss it in earlier editions? I don't know. Did you read the earlier editions? Now, I'm not trying to be a smart ass, but here's the way that works for me. It's I can pretty well remember most of the ponds and lakes that I've ever looked at. When I sit down to write, I get in a zone, and I'm so dialed in and focused. I write it, I go back and edit it, proofread it, and then I'm done with it, and I don't ever remember anything I wrote, which is goofy. So I don't know if you missed it or not. I don't know if I addressed it, but since you put this here, one of the things I do with Ask the Boss is if I don't get enough email questions, I'll go back through these broadcasts and find some of the better questions, and then I'll answer it. So, Ari, I tell you what, do me a favor since you're watching, rewrite your question and post it here. When I get ready to dig in and do Ask the Boss here in a few days, I'll see if I can find it. Christopher Aguilar, bass were having fun this evening with dragonflies. It was good to see the water exploding as I pull up. Well, I happen to have a story in my book coming up about bass and dragonflies. Central Illinois, Jeff Wallen. Okay, Jeff, I need to scroll back. I've already forgotten what we were talking about. Oh, how long after a total fish loss from a turnover can you restock? Probably now if you want to. But you know what? I would try to find out what you've got. Hello, Bob Jones. What's going on, buddy? I know you did that 10 minutes ago. I'm kind of, and I don't remember exactly where you're from. Illinois? I don't know. I'm trying to remember. Deborah Corley, how do we deal with filamentous algae this late in the season with our super low water levels? Don't deal with it. Leave it alone. You had temperatures in the 90s this week. Here's what's going to happen. Your water temperature is about to mitigate and begin to fall. When that happens, the algae is going to go away. So I would leave it alone. I wouldn't mess with it right now. Not when it's hot. The risks are too high. Jeremy Day, never thought about where my feeder is located. I just found an easy spot. Can you say a little bit more about strategic locations? Yeah. So let's say you, Jeremy Day, one of your goals is you want to be feeding your bluegill the best you can. So your strategy to place a feeder, of course, first of all, you got to be able to get to it. You know, if Bay's got to back a side-by-side up, out in the water, put a ladder up, and fill his feeders. Or he sends Keith to do it. And sometimes Keith will put a ladder in the back of the side-by-side to be able to climb up it, because Bay's got his feeders on legs above the water because he knows at some point his water level is going to go up. Plus, he wants to have the feeders up high to throw the feed out farther out because a lot of them are in shallow water. So on the strategic locations I'm talking about, like for example, if you're feeding bluegills, you want to feed where the bluegills are going to be the safest and not get decimated by bass. So that's typically in fairly shallow water, very close to habitat. But let's say that your strategy is you want to draw some bluegill out of aquatic plants so the bass can hammer them, feed over deeper water. So your strategy is going to be based on your goals and how your lake is working. Hello, Vito. Oh, man, I love you too, guy. I tell you what, I miss Whitesboro sometimes, and I lay down and I get over it. We love living on the river. But I miss Vito. 300 pounds of MVP went into the feeders on Sunday. Well, I tell you what, you're going to have some happy fish, not that you don't already do. All right, still need a good title. Yes, I do. I don't have a good title for the book. Bob, Baseball, and Bass. Huh. R.E. Thompson watched almost all the program tonight before I realized it was not live. It will help when you sign on to give the date. Let's talk about thermocline. Is it true that the average pond has a thermocline at half the depth? Yes, that's true. I assume that is the heat of the sun causes the thermocline, with the bottom portion being cooler than the upper portion. The heat of the sun, here's the way that works. So the sun pushes the heat down as far as it can go, and of course when water warms, it expands. As it expands, it doesn't weigh as much, so it's going to stay on top. So the heat can only be pushed down so far because it's being shoved down by the sun and horizontal movement. So when you have the wind blow across a pond, it creates horizontal waves. When they blow across the pond, they hit the shore, they turn under, and they go the other way. So you have this kind of circular current going on like this, oblong, and it can only push the heat down so far, and that's typically about halfway. That's why. Is it true that there is no oxygen or very limited oxygen in the lower portion? Yes, that's true. Why is it so? It's because the biological oxygen demand of the microbes that are decomposing organic matter on the bottom of the lake consume it. And oxygen is only sourced two ways. One is through contact with the atmosphere, and the other is through photosynthesis from aquatic plants, which is going to be plankton, and rooted plants, floating plants, whatever kind of plants are in the lake. That's where oxygen comes from. So when you've got a warm layer of water sitting perched on top of a lower layer of water, that cooler water can't contact the atmosphere. Plants aren't growing in it because the sunlight's not penetrating down to it. So the only thing that can happen with that lower layer of water underneath the thermocline is that gap between the upper layer and the lower layer. The thermocline can be 6 inches thick. It can be several feet thick, depending on where you are in the trophic phase of that lake. Look that one up. Trophic. There he is, using those big words again. Trophic. 7-letter word. You can look that one up. So what happens in that lower layer of water, the biological oxygen demand, which is mostly microbes, consume the oxygen more rapidly than the water can absorb more oxygen down there. And it doesn't take long in the spring, maybe 2 weeks, and that oxygen is gone. If the deepest portion of the lake or pond is 20 feet, will the thermocline be at 10 feet? Yes. If so, could you not find fish closer to the bank at 10 feet of water? Yes. However, when the water gets really, really hot in the summertime, R.E., it's a good question. I'm going to take this. This will be in Ask the Boss next issue. So you guys can read this answer. And I tell you this, it won't be the same answer I'm telling you, because I'll be able to pull it out here, read through it, and I'm going to type a different answer than I'm giving you, but it's going to be pretty close. So what happens is the fish, fish are always looking for the prime operating temperature. So when you've got a thermocline going on and the water's stratified, that upper layer, the top few feet of the water is going to be a lot warmer than the next few feet, which is going to be warmer than the next few feet down to the thermocline. So, in the springtime, bass come up shallow, they spawn. Same with crappie, same with bluegill. But then after that, when the water starts to heat up, they want to go find cooler water, because that's what triggers their movement. It's more than anything else besides spawning. The need to reproduce. When they get in a rut, they're going to go do that. But otherwise, they're trying to find the best temperature. And they will seek the temperature even more aggressively than they're going to try to find more oxygen. That's what's interesting. They only need like 3.5 parts per million oxygen, and they won't suffocate. So if they can find water at 78 degrees with 3.5 parts per million, compared to 84 degrees with 7 parts per million oxygen, they're going to go to that cooler water, and they'll do it every time. What causes the pond to turn over? Does that not bring the non-oxygenated water to the surface? Yes. So you saw Jeff Wallen's question about having a fish kill from a turnover. So when you've got too much depth in the water and you've got a greater volume of water below the thermocline than you do above it, what causes the turnover It's when that warm upper layer of water cools to the same temperature as that lower layer, they mix. And when they mix, that's a turnover. And how fast a turnover happens is based on how fast that warm upper layer cools down to the same temperature or cooler water than that's below the thermocline. Now here's how that works. The physics of water are pretty fascinating. If you weigh a gallon of water at 39 degrees, that's the heaviest it will ever be. If you don't believe me, go do it. Weigh it. Get an accurate scale. Weigh it. You'll see. 39-degree water is the heaviest it will be. As it warms from that or cools from that, it begins to expand. That's why ice floats. Ice is 32 degrees or colder. The water below the ice is floating on top, right? We know that. Well, if the water below the ice was 32 degrees, it would be ice. So it's not. So what happens is that denser water, just got a text. So that denser water has a tendency to sink. So when that warmer layer of water cools down, its density increases. When that happens, it becomes heavy. And as it does, it sinks and it mixes with that bottom layer. When those two layers mix, if that bottom layer is a greater volume with 0 oxygen levels and the pond happens to turn over at daylight, when oxygen levels are at their lowest due to respiration, which that's a topic for another day, that's when you see a turnover that can actually kill fish. So there you go. Does that mean we need to be fishing? No, it doesn't really mean you need to be fishing deeper. You need to be fishing deeper when the pond's stratified. Actually, when a pond turns over, that's a bad time to be fishing because at that point, I'm going to tell you 7 times out of 10, the fish are distressed for a few days because oxygen levels go down, water quality deteriorates because you get that stagnant water beneath the thermocline mixing with that upper layer, and that water quality has to deteriorate. As a matter of fact, you can smell a turnover. It smells musty. And when that happens, I've got 2 texts. I'm getting distracted. Bear with me. We're almost done. So, I lost my train of thought, but I'm going to get it right back. So, rather than fishing deeper, so what happens is when that water quality deteriorates, it takes it 2 or 3 days sometimes to regain its health. And during those 2 or 3 days, the fish are not doing anything other than trying not to die. In Jeff Wallen's case in Central Illinois, they died. And it's typically because when you have that kind of a turnover, the oxygen gets consumed, drops to the point where the fish suffocate. Now, Jeff, one thing you can think about is aeration. Aeration can minimize the risk of having a fish kill, but there also needs to be a strategy with that, which is another topic for another day. All right, Ari, you say that a bass cannot stay in water past, I didn't say that. A bass doesn't like water past 83.5 degrees. So if the surface temperature so let me tell you what I said. When the water temperature gets above 84 degrees, bass don't like it. And I've seen aerated ponds. The first one I saw this happen was probably 15 years ago, a 10-acre lake that was only 10 feet deep. The landowner was aerating it way more than he should have. He had Vertex design an aeration system for him, and he liked it so much he bought a second one. So he was moving that water way too fast, and the water temperature was 87 degrees top to bottom. There was no thermal refuge anywhere for a bass in that lake, anywhere. Well, the older fish, it's kind of like you and I trying to backpack through the Sahara Desert. Now, RE's in good shape. He can probably kick my ass going across the Sahara Desert. I'll make it for one day, and I'm crying for my mama. Well, when you take the older fish that have been a little bit distressed, they don't like 87 degrees, and some of them are going to die. So if the surface temperature is 89 degrees in the pond with diffusers, can we assume it's close to 89? Here's what I'm going to tell you. You need to measure that. If you're going to be managing lakes and ponds with diffusers, and the surface temperature is 89 degrees, and the diffusers are running like they should, you can pretty well bet it's 89 degrees all the way through the water column. And you just get a thermometer, buy an oxygen meter and check it top to bottom with a thermometer. Go find out. And if that's the case, then you need to change your strategy on aeration. That's when you put it on a timer from like 9 at night to 9 in the morning, or 10 at night to 6 in the morning, or something like that. All right, guys, we're going to bust through this. We're going to run out of time. This is going really fast. Mark Hicks, I have a small area on my pond has primrose. The tilapia has kept it in check all summer, but the tilapia will die off here in North Carolina in a couple of months. Should I eradicate the primrose this winter or next year's tilapia? How would you eradicate it? And here's what I mean. Here's what I mean by eradicate. I would rake it out. I don't think I would. I don't think I'd murder it with herbicides. I think I would take it out. Bay Miltonberger filled off the jet ski this time. I'm not sure what that means. Filled off the jet ski. I don't know. I know you fish off the jet ski, which I haven't met too many people that do that, but Bay's a classic dude. Vito, carpe diem for your book name. That's pretty funny. I won't use that, but I like it a lot. All right, so let me see here. Let me back up here. Michael O'Neill, I'm building a 1 acre pond in Northern California. It's 150 feet across. What depth would you recommend? A 1 acre pond, Northern California. You have this thing called winter. So I think if it's going to be 150 feet across, I'm going to give you the most thoughtful answer I can give you. If you have a consistent water source with some flushing, you probably don't need more than 12 or 13 feet of water. If you think your lake or your pond is going to fluctuate as much as 2 or 3 feet through the course of the year, shoot for 16 to 18 feet of depth. Carpe diem. I kind of like that. Maybe bass diem baseball. Okay, let's see what. Tell Jackson. I like the way he thinks. Jackson, you're the man, dude. That's pretty cool. It happened overnight, had aeration going, may have been a crop duster that was working 2 weeks before the water was 80. Okay, so if a crop duster did it, that's not a turnover, and I'm going to change my answer. If a crop duster did it, that's a toxicity issue. That's not a turnover issue. And if that's the case, bass ball. Oh, dude, that is so obvious. Bass ball. If we do that, we're going to have to have a subtitle. I'll bounce that off the team. Bass ball. So, Jeff, changing your story on me, dude. Happened overnight, had aeration going, may have been a crop duster that was working 2 weeks before the water temperature was 80 degrees. All right, so Jeff, disregard everything I said. If you had an aeration system going, especially if it was bottom diffused aeration, you didn't have a turnover because your aeration system prevented that from happening. The aeration system kept the pond from stratifying. So I didn't know that until right now. All right, John Dyer bass ball. Woo! Man, I got to ponder that one. Well, hey guys, it's about that time. We busted through a fast hour, all the way up to 14 viewers. Woo, man. Hey, hashtag Pond Moss Magazine. I should have said this at the beginning. Click like, share to your timeline. You're eligible for a drawing, and Leanne's going to be working on that because I know she was watching this some tonight because I saw her kind of check in for a few minutes. So, she writes a little intro, then she disappears, then she pops back up. So, guys, I'm going to knock it off for the day, and Bay, I'll be ringing your number here, and Debbie got a little surprise for you, plus I need to come and get Bass Pro Shops nets. So, in the meantime, guys, hey, Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year, cheaper than a Friday night date in the last year. And this memoir book is about to get ready to go to layout, and I'll give you more details. I'm waiting on a cover. Once I get the cover, then I'll show it to you, and then we'll start doing some pre-sales. So, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. Call it a day. Thanks, fellas. Virgil, you stayed hung in the whole hour. You're the only one that did that, except for maybe Jeremy and Bay. I don't know. So, guys, I appreciate you. Oh, here comes some stars. Thanks, Vito. There's payday right there. I forgot to talk about that because I don't know anything about it. So, until next Tuesday, you know what? I'm going to be in Missouri. If I have a good sell, we will go live. And I'm going to be hanging out with some pretty cool people next Tuesday. So I'll post something during the day on Tuesday and let you guys know what I'm going to do. If I can broadcast, I will. If not, I'll be thinking about it. So adios for now.